Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Church on the Green, located in New Haven, Connecticut. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are invited and welcome. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministry at United Church on the Green, please visit our website at unitednewhaven.org. Thank you.
Our first reading today is from the book of Exodus, chapter 16, verses 1 through 3 and 9 through 15. The whole congregation of the Israelites set out from Elim in Israel, came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month, after they had departed from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, 'Draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining.'" And as Aaron spoke out to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, 'At the twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God.'" In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." Our second reading is from the book of Matthew, chapter 15, verses 32 through 39. Then Jesus called his disciples and said to him, "I have compassion for the crowd, because they have been with me now for 3 days and have had nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might faint on the way." The disciples said to him, "Where are we to get enough bread in the desert to feed so great a crowd?" Jesus asked them, "How many loaves have you?" They said, 7, and a few small fish. Then, ordering the crowd to sit down on the ground, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and after giving them thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all of them ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Those who had eaten were 4,000 men, besides women and children. After sending away the crowds, he got into the boat and went into the region of Magadan. Brothers and sisters, God is still speaking. May our ears be open to listen and understand. Thanks be to God.
Would you pray with me, please? Dear God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our Redeemer. Amen. So today is World Communion Sunday, where Christians all around the world are going to be celebrating communion together. It is also a time that we're going to be collecting for neighbors in need. We are fully cognizant that there are many who do not have enough bread to eat in our world. Clearly, we can help. I, along with all of you, have been appalled by the lack of basic food and necessities of life that victims of the hurricanes and the fires and the earthquakes are experiencing. Our Neighbors in Needs offering will go to Help Justice and Compassion Ministries, and will help those who need food and fresh water. And in partnership with UCC Disaster Relief, we will be there. So as we break bread together today as members of the United Church on the Green, we break the challah bread that Alfredo has graciously made, and we are aware of the plenty that we have, the abundance of our lives. As my daughter always says, we have gracious plenty. At the same time, the words of the Exodus narrative really recently in our minds connect with the news we have been hearing every day. The Israelites are wandering in the desert crying for bread, for meat and fresh water. The victims of the hurricanes in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean and in Texas are also crying out for bread, for water, for the necessities of life. So in that context, let's see what was happening in this Old Testament story and see where there are words for us today. God has commanded Moses and Aaron to lead the Exodus out of Egypt away from that new Pharaoh with his brutal slavery that he imposed upon the Hebrew people. He promised them, you see, a land of their own, a land that was going to be a land full of milk and honey. The wilderness that they traveled through was no paradise. The people are hungry and depressed, and they're anxious. Where is this God who promised us so much? They complain. We are hungry and we have no food. The unrelenting sun scorches them, and the wilderness is barren, and it appears that there is no end in sight. Some even forget how harsh the conditions were in Egypt and complain that life is no better here. The Israelites said to Aaron and Moses, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Oh, how quickly they forget. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day." And the Lord said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." Well, as Walter Brueggemann calls it, this was for them a zone of bereft, a time of deprivation and grief and emptiness and loss and tremendous doubt. The ancestors of the Israelites in Genesis had worshipped a God, you see, of fertility, El Shaddai. And under stress in this barren desert, they complained that their old God of fertility was not providing for them. The God of fertility had given them fields and pasture and children and sustenance. This is what they said they need now. But hear how the development of the faith of the Israelites from the first book of the Bible to the second changes. By Moses' time, as we know from our recent week's readings, the most pressing issue for the Israelites was the slavery that held them in bondage to that new Pharaoh. And as they groaned in their suffering, they prayed to God for release. And by the time of Moses, God claimed the name Yahweh, heard the people's groaning and their prayers, and did indeed free them from the mighty empire of Egypt. But unfortunately now, the most pressing issue for the Israelites is hunger. And this wilderness doesn't look very likely to solve that problem. Here the people don't need a warrior God to deliver them. They needed that old character of the fertility God to feed them. So Moses and Aaron are trying to tell them that this God, this Yahweh, is a God of all things. Not only a warrior God, but a God of fertility and a God of love and a God of promise and a God of covenant. Bread and water are so essential to life. We all have been haunted by the pictures and the news stories of the people in Puerto Rico, in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and other parts of the Caribbean. Since Hurricane Irma and Maria, where all food and all supplies are gone, and there is no bread, and there is no water. I see the homeless on our streets and on the green, and am grateful that we can provide manna for them through desks and through the food bank, our soup kitchen, and our second hour. But the problem remains, and it echoes what the Israelites were crying for in the Exodus narratives. God promised to the Israelites that at nighttime quails would come and would gather at the camp. There it is, meat for the hungry. And in the new morning, as the dew leaves the desert, these fine wisps of dew would remain on the surface of the wilderness. A fine, flaky substance, like frost on the ground. They could collect it and they could eat it every morning as a gift from this all-powerful Yahweh God. Manna, a substance that is defined as the miracle gift. In this time of bereft, here was a miracle. And the miracles are found in the Old Testament, in the New Testament as well, as we saw in the feeding of the 4,000, or in some versions, feeding of the 5,000. For what they did there was that they shared all that they had. It was a miracle of generosity. Are we seeing too the miracles in our own life, even in times of our own wilderness? Are we seeing these miracles happen in Puerto Rico? Will we trust in God's providence and see how through God we can become God's blessings and become the manna carriers to the hungry in our world? I'm reminded of the old well-known joke that John Blue shared with me last week about the man who was caught in the floods, and he got up onto his roof and he waited to be saved. And a canoe came by and a boat came by, and he kept saying, "No, God will provide." And finally a helicopter came. You know this story? The helicopter came and the man kept saying, "No, no, no, God will provide." Well, then he died. When he went to heaven, he said to God, "Why didn't you save me?" And God said, "Well, I brought the canoe, I brought the boat, and I brought the helicopter." May that be a joke that has a truth to all of us. In so many ways, we are called to be those boats, to be those helicopters, the canoes, to give in whatever way we can for those who are so desperately hurting. I am reminded of the penitential prayer that is offered in Jewish homes at the start of Sabbath. Days pass and years vanish, and we walk sightless among the miracles. Dear people, I ask you, are we sightless? Are there not miracles in our midst? Can we open our eyes to see and exclaim the wonders of God's generosity? God does provide, but we can be the carriers of this generosity through justice to a hungry world. Just as Moses and Aaron were carriers of God's message of plenty to the hungry wilderness wanderers, so too we can become instruments of change and of justice to those who need food and water and supplies as well. The federal government does not take up the burden of helping our citizens. It is up to us to do so. On the news, I read about how many people in New York, who has such a large population of Puerto Ricans, gathered food themselves and sent it down. Or as the mayor of San Juan says, "We are hungry. This is May Day. We need help." We too need to carry that message to the world. And we can send help through the UCC Disaster Relief. We can collect supplies through them. We can even go down ourselves, and dear people, we can pray. There is need all around us. It is our God who calls us to lay claim to that charge. And there will indeed be manna for the next day's waking. May it be so.